thought he was clever. He thought he was invisible. He even thought his victims liked him. Let that sink in for a second. Gary Hilton, the so-called National Forest serial killer, believed the people he murdered were somehow enjoying his company, right up to the moment he took their lives. It's hard to decide what's worse, his actions or the fact that he believed he was human while doing them. Gary Hilton wasn't your average killer. He wasn't the shadowy figure you'd spot in a dark alley or some deranged maniac frothing at the mouth. No, he looked like your average scruffy old man, maybe a hiker, maybe a traveler, just a guy with a van and a dog. But under that harmless appearance was a monster who used national forests as his hunting grounds, places where families go to escape, to connect with nature. And Gary, he turned those forests into graves. Before the headlines, before the trials, before the mugshots and confessions, there was a man wandering the woods, completely convinced that he was some kind of misunderstood survivor, a drifter just trying to make it through life. That's the lie he told himself. But behind that lie was a predator, one who waited until he was broke, desperate and hungry, and then he killed, not out of passion, not out of anger, but out of calculated convenience. When his stomach growled and his wallet emptied, he didn't get a job, he picked a target. Meredith Emerson was 24 years old, a bright, athletic, kind-hearted young woman. She went hiking with her dog on Blood Mountain in Georgia on New Year's Day, 2008, and she never came home. Gary followed her on the trail. He stalked her, he confronted her, he tied her up, and for 4 straight days he kept her alive. 4 days. He told police that she was nice and smart. He said she cooperated. He made it sound like they shared something special, like it wasn't complete horror for her. But let's be honest here, she was terrified, she was trying to survive, and she knew what he was planning. Gary later confessed that he couldn't kill her immediately because she kept giving him the wrong ATM pin, so he had to wait until she was worn down, and when she finally broke, when she gave him what he wanted, he murdered her, beat her to death with a tire iron, then decapitated her to hide her identity. That's not the act of a man surviving. That's the act of a cold-blooded killer who still thinks his victim liked him. And it gets worse. He actually made a deal with the police, told them where her body was, in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. He took her life, and then negotiated to keep his own. But Meredith wasn't the only one. By the time he was caught, Gary Hilton had already murdered at least 4 people that we know of. Elderly hikers John and Irene Bryant, nurse Cheryl Dunlap. Their only mistake was crossing paths with a man who saw human beings as tools, ATMs, scapegoats, walking meals, disposable. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killer. This was a planner, a manipulator, a man who used charm like a weapon and sympathy like camouflage. By the time Meredith Emerson was reported missing, Gary Hilton had already been killing for months, and no one had connected the dots. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. He wasn't slick. He left clues. He used his victims' credit cards, left DNA, security camera footage, but somehow, this scruffy drifter with a rusted van and a red dog kept slipping through the cracks, like law enforcement across 3 states were all looking in the wrong direction. And meanwhile, people were dying. October 2007, Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. John and Irene Bryant. He was 80, she was 84, married over 50 years. They were experienced hikers, loved nature, lived simply. One morning, they set off on a trail like they'd done 100 times before, and vanished. Nobody noticed right away. Elderly couples disappear all the time, right? Maybe they got lost, maybe they fell. That's what people told themselves, until Irene's body was found in a remote part of the forest. Head trauma, blunt force, like she never saw it coming. John was missing for weeks. When they finally found him, he was buried in the woods, shot in the head, his bank card missing, just like Meredith's. Now let's pause right there, because this is where the rage starts to build. Same pattern, same type of victim, same van, same damn dog, but nobody linked it. Not yet. Why? Because Hilton didn't have a fixed address, no phone, no job, no family reporting him. He was a ghost, drifting between Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. And the truth is, nobody was really looking for a guy like him. He didn't stand out. He knew how to camp. He knew how to survive in the wild. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous. December 2007, Apalachicola National Forest, Florida. Cheryl Dunlap, 46, a nurse, Sunday school teacher, devoted mom, the kind of person who still left her car unlocked because she believed in people. She went missing after heading out to read her Bible in peace, just needed a quiet place to clear her head. She never made it back. 3 days later, her ATM card was being used in nearby cities, but the man on the grainy security footage had his face completely covered. Still, it was him, Gary Hilton, again, and this time, he didn't just kill her. He mutilated her body, cut off her head and her hands, left her like a puzzle he didn't want solved, like a name he wanted erased. He dumped her in the woods and kept moving, just another forest, another crime scene, another soul snuffed out. By now, 3 states had bodies in the woods, 3 families were grieving, and still no arrest, no manhunt, no headlines screaming his name. Gary Hilton was free, free to drive, free to stalk, free to hunt again. But finally, his arrogance caught up with him. After Meredith's murder in January 2008, Hilton did something careless. He stopped at a gas station and asked an employee how to clean blood out of his van. Blood, out of a van. The employee got suspicious, called it in. The police traced the van, and when they stopped him, they found Meredith's belongings in the back. Her clothes, her wallet, her dog leash, and just like that, the ghost had a face, and his name was Gary Hilton. He confessed, but not out of remorse, not because he felt bad. No, he offered a deal. He told investigators where Meredith's body was only if they took the death penalty off the table, and they did. He strangled the truth out of the system just like he did his victims. But here's what makes your blood boil. Even with all that evidence, even after his confession, Florida and North Carolina still had to build their own separate cases. So instead of shutting this man away forever, the legal system gave him time to talk, time to twist the narrative, time to try and paint himself as a broken man who just needed money. And while the courts played catch-up, more questions piled up. Like, how many others are there? Because people started digging, looking back. Hikers gone missing in the 90s, unsolved murders near national parks, similar methods, similar wounds, similar stories. Gary Hilton wasn't just a name on one case file anymore. He was a serial killer, and the scariest part, we still don't know how many bodies he left behind. Gary Hilton wasn't smart, he wasn't slick. He just understood one thing, that nobody watches the woods. Nobody tracks the drifter with the friendly dog. Nobody thinks evil looks like the guy asking for change at the gas station. But they should have, because while everyone else ignored him, he was watching all of us.
When the news finally broke, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like shock. People across Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina couldn't believe what they were hearing. A serial killer, camping in national forests, targeting innocent hikers for money. He wasn't some ghost story anymore. He had a name, a face, and a chilling smile as he sat in court like none of it bothered him. The trial began with Georgia. It was the easiest to close. He had confessed to murdering Meredith Emerson. They found her belongings in his van. He told them where to find her body, but it wasn't out of guilt. It was a trade. He agreed to help locate her remains, only if they promised not to seek the death penalty, and they agreed. So he walked out with a life sentence and a sickening smirk, like he'd beaten the system. But that wasn't the end, because Florida wasn't about to play nice. This wasn't just a man who took lives. This was a man who dismembered a Sunday school teacher, dumped her body in the woods, and tried to melt into the background like it was just another day. The murder of Cheryl Dunlap was personal for the community, and this time they wanted death. The trial was intense. They brought in forensic evidence, blood-soaked details, financial records. They showed how he used her ATM card in disguise, how he moved between towns, and how methodical he was. But what rattled people the most was how calm he seemed. No remorse, no breakdown, just a man sitting in a chair, blinking slowly, occasionally scratching his beard, like he was just waiting for a bus. He didn't even deny it. His lawyers couldn't argue innocence. All they could try to sell was sanity. But even that was a stretch, because here was a man who said, under oath, that he thought Cheryl trusted him, that she was comfortable around him, like he wasn't holding her hostage, like he wasn't plotting to kill her the whole time. This wasn't confusion. This was pure, dangerous delusion. The jury didn't flinch. In 2011, Gary Hilton was sentenced to death in Florida. It was a win, not just legally, but emotionally. Finally, someone called this man exactly what he was, a manipulator and a murderer who deserved no mercy. And still, that wasn't the end of it. North Carolina stepped in next. They wanted answers for John and Irene Bryant, the elderly couple who vanished on a simple hike. 2 lives, 2 innocent souls, gone because Hilton needed a few bucks and a meal. In 2013, he was handed 4 more life sentences, 1 for kidnapping, 1 for robbery, 1 for murder, and 1 for being a predator in plain sight. He didn't contest it. By then he was already locked away in a high-security prison in Florida, sitting on death row. His only real concern, whether or not he could still have access to books and sunlight. Disgusting. But here's the part that left people sick. After all the trials, after all the sentencing, after all the families were left grieving, he started talking to reporters, to interviewers, to documentary filmmakers, and what came out of his mouth? Unbelievable. He claimed that he was misunderstood, said his victims weren't afraid, said they talked to him like friends, said they died with dignity. This wasn't remorse, it was performance. Hilton didn't see himself as a monster, he saw himself as interesting, as someone worthy of a platform, as someone with a story to tell. And the worst part, some people listened. Documentary crews started covering his crimes, true crime enthusiasts wrote blogs, a few even tried to correspond with him. But real people, the ones who felt his damage, knew better. They were furious, and rightly so. Because Hilton wasn't interesting, he wasn't deep, he wasn't tragic, or mysterious, or clever. He was evil, plain and simple, and every time he opened his mouth to speak, it was just another layer of cruelty. You know what he once said, "I'm not a bad guy, I just had a few bad days, a few bad days." He murdered strangers, he dismembered bodies, he used dogs and charm as bait. That's not a bad day, that's a calculated pattern of destruction, that's a choice, over and over again. So now, there he sits, on death row, a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room, a man who thought his victims liked him, a man who thought he was the victim, and all the while families still grieve, the woods are still silent, and the blood he spilled still soaks into places no one will ever hike the same way again. For years, everyone thought the nightmare ended in 2008. He was caught, he was sentenced, he was locked away, done, but that was never the truth, because Gary Hilton never told the full story, and the more investigators looked, the more they realized the trail didn't start with Meredith Emerson. It didn't start with the Bryants or Cheryl Dunlap either. It started long before, and nobody knows where it really began. In the years after his arrest, law enforcement in multiple states reopened cold cases, hikers gone missing, bodies never found, abandoned campsites with no explanation. Some of those cases went back as far as 1997, long before his name ever hit the headlines. And the similarities? Chilling. Victims who disappeared in national forests, bank cards drained, no signs of forced entry, just vanished. No struggle, no suspects, just silence. And there's one detail investigators couldn't ignore. All those forests were along the exact routes Hilton traveled during his drifting years. Before he started killing, Hilton lived in the margins. He was homeless, he did odd jobs, he stayed in wooded areas and national parks for weeks at a time. He was constantly on the move, never settling, never staying long enough to be noticed. But that's also what made him impossible to trace. No address, no job history, no consistent ID, just a man, a van, and a dog. And everywhere he went, someone disappeared. In 2012, a team of cold case detectives in North Carolina publicly confirmed they were looking into 3 unsolved deaths from 2000 to 2004 that matched Hilton's pattern. They wouldn't name names, but one official said, "We believe Hilton may have done this before and gotten away with it." He didn't deny it, but he didn't admit it either. Instead, he smiled during interviews and said things like, "You think you know everything, but you really don't." That smug tone, that self-satisfied glint in his eyes, like he was proud of holding secrets, like he thought it gave him power. And then came 2025, 17 years after Meredith's murder, 14 years after Cheryl, over a decade sitting on death row. Gary Hilton decided to speak. He gave an on-camera confession about Cheryl Dunlap's murder, his first full public account of what happened. The reason? He claimed he was dying, said he had cancer, said it was time to get things off his chest. But instead of closure, he gave more confusion. He didn't just admit the murder, he detailed it. He told interviewers how he watched her, how he followed her, how she didn't scream when he approached, how she was calm. He described the final moments, like a man talking about the weather, casual, emotionless, weirdly matter-of-fact. And then he said it again, "She wasn't afraid of me. I don't think any of them were." There it was, that same lie, that same delusion. Even in the face of death, even knowing the world hated him, Even after years behind bars, he still thought he was some kind of misunderstood figure, a gentle killer, a tragic outlaw, like he wanted people to pity him, but no one did. The public reaction was brutal. Thousands of comments poured in. He's not sorry, he's proud. Imagine thinking your victims liked you. He deserves worse than death. Nobody believed his story. Nobody saw him as anything but what he was, a cold, manipulative murderer, clinging to attention like it was oxygen. But one thing stuck. When asked if there were more victims, he looked directly at the camera, paused, and said, "Probably." That single word sent shivers through the families of the missing, and it reopened every file investigators had quietly shelved over the years, because if Hilton killed one person in secret, he could have killed dozens. And what's worse, he's the only one who knows, and he's not in a rush to tell anyone. He's playing a game, holding his silence like a weapon, knowing that the mystery gives him relevance, knowing that the pain of not knowing haunts families more than the truth. People say justice was served, that he's behind bars awaiting death, but for some families, there's still no closure, no body, no grave, no last words, just the fear that their loved one crossed paths with Gary Hilton, and no one noticed. The scariest part about monsters like him isn't just what they do, it's how long they get away with it, how ordinary they look, how invisible they are until it's too late, and how, even after they're caught, their damage keeps echoing through the lives they shattered.
They said it was over. The court had spoken. The jury had decided. Gary Michael Hilton, sentenced to death, locked away in a concrete box at Florida's Union Correctional Institution, waiting for the end. But did that really feel like justice? Ask the families. Ask the people who wake up every day knowing their loved one was hunted like prey in a forest, discarded like trash, and spoken about like they were objects. Hilton lived. They didn't. But even behind bars, he still had what he craved most: attention. Books, letters, interviews. Every few years, someone new would try to get inside his mind, as if there was some deep insight worth pulling out. But there was nothing profound there, just ego, just a tired, twisted man who still believed he was more important than the people he killed. The families didn't get peace. Meredith Emerson's parents kept fighting for victims' rights laws. Cheryl Dunlap's friends still visited the trail where she vanished. John and Irene Bryant's community planted trees in their honor, trying to bring life back to the place where death had stolen so much. But every time Gary Hilton's name resurfaced, so did the pain, and he knew it. He liked it, because for monsters like him, silence is the real punishment, and he did everything he could to avoid it. He filed appeals, tried to reverse his death sentence, claimed he was treated unfairly. He wasn't. He got more chances than he gave any of his victims. He had lawyers, trials, a jury of peers. His victims, they had a stranger with a van and a weapon. They didn't get a say. They didn't get to plead. They didn't get to beg for their lives, not in any way that mattered to him. And still, the system dragged on. Years passed, appeals piled up, and Gary Hilton, the killer who left heads and hands in forests, lived another day. For some, that was unbearable. How can someone cause so much pain and still get 3 meals a day, medical care, and a bed? How can someone who confessed still have rights when the people he murdered had theirs ripped away in minutes? It didn't feel like punishment, it felt like waiting. In early 2025, rumors swirled that Hilton was sick, cancer, a slow end for a man who gave others no mercy. He didn't die screaming, he didn't die scared. He gave one last interview, smirked through it, claimed he had regrets, but not for the killings, only that he got caught. Let that sink in. He didn't regret the blood. He didn't regret the pain. He regretted that the game ended. That's not a man. That's a predator who never stopped hunting, even when the cage door shut. He finally died in June 2025. No ceremony, no tears, no legacy, just a prison report, a body, and a closed file. For some families, it was a relief. For others, it felt hollow, because no matter how the story ends, the people he murdered never get to come back. No sentence, no matter how harsh, can change that. And yet the story of Gary Hilton lives on, not because he deserves to be remembered, but because his victims do, because people should know what he did, because hikers still walk those trails, because women still go missing in forests, because monsters don't always look like monsters until it's too late. He wanted people to believe he was complicated. He wasn't. He was just a killer, selfish, delusional, cruel, empty. He thought his victims liked him. They didn't. They were terrified, and they deserved better than to become part of his twisted fantasy. So the next time someone tells you true crime is just entertainment, remember their names: Meredith, Cheryl, John, Irene. They were real. Their lives mattered.
and their stories should be told by people who still feel the weight of what was taken. Gary Hilton may be gone, but the damage he did, that stays forever.